The moon in Capricorn expresses the moment when processes culminate. There, the extraordinary concentration of energy destined to give the final form to a long series of preceding transformations in the deployment of the Zodiac is produced. In this phase, the tendencies to variation, the development of differences, and the latent possibilities are necessarily inhibited. The energy focuses on the objective of manifesting what, for a certain cycle, will be its definitive form. This contraction forces one to strip away everything that does not coincide with the essential and forces each of the constituent elements of that phase to obey the requirements of the structure that manifests itself in it. It is evident, then, that this energy is contradictory with the initial stages of a process. Here we are at the other pole of what, given to the growth that is its own, presents itself as indeterminate and full of possibilities, but at the same time vulnerable and in need of protection. Something concludes in Capricorn, and therefore acquires extreme definition, durability, structuring, and capacity for self-support. In this phase, growth has ended. As we saw in the introduction, this type of quality fulfills at the same time the function of sustaining what cannot do it by itself. Consequently, it is complementary to the lunar, configuring itself as the external side of protection, the aspect of protection that must constantly interact with the potentially destructive energies of the rest of the system, and that, for the same reason, must have the capacity to resist them consistently. The person with the moon in Capricorn yearns for the cold mother to love and repair them, in psychological terms, the accumulated suffering. But it happens that they remain as trapped in the past, in the lunar fragment, as when they were installed on the other side of the mechanism. In this way, although they may be loved by many people, they cannot be loved by their projected mother in another. They will be loved by someone different who will not succeed, even if they try, in giving them the key to the icy hermitage in which they were locked up in childhood, and from which they now want to get out desperately. To get out, both for this one and for any other moon, the person needs to understand the totality of the mechanism and open up to an affectivity that is in the present and that the imaginary prevents them from deploying. In this case, if the moon really fulfilled its function, affectivity no longer responds only to the moon. Something grew, matured, and blossomed and now unfolds, including all the energies of the letter at its effective level. But of course, for this to happen, experiences will be necessary that step by step lead us to disidentification with the mechanism, in this case with the illusion of isolation. While the person with the moon in Capricorn yearns for affection from a unique and reparative source, they will be recreating the usual unconscious dynamic. Although they may appear outwardly out of their isolation, and no longer seem the cold and distant solitary character, they continue to yearn to remain isolated with mom, now projected into symbiosis with another, or with a group or institution. It can be seen, therefore, that the moon in Capricorn has great difficulty distributing affection. When an effective possibility opens up, they put everything into that situation, with which they inevitably spoil it. And this is not a criticism, but the description of an experience through which people with this moon will have to transit until they discover themselves in all their complexity. A key clue that, in itself, marks the beginning of the transformation is to hear one of these people say that they do not feel well, that they feel depressed or needy, and that they ask their friends to bear with them in that state. It is a huge progress because, in general, they spend the whole Sunday afternoon next to the phone, waiting for some friend to get depressed and call them to tell them their problems. It is that, we already know, listening to the problems of the other and sustaining them is equivalent to an effective bond. This is why the key is to register the need, to realize that the first mistake is to believe that they need less than they really need. The second mistake is the complementary opposite, believing that they need much more than is real. If we understand the nature of the cold and lonely imaginary, we can realize that, whether identified with that numbing cold or experiencing it as an imposed reality from the outside, the person lives in the imaginary prolongation of their past. In both cases, by excess or by default, they demonstrate their difficulty in contact with real need.